Welcome, everyone, to the latest installment of the Vent webinar series. I am Ben Reynolds, producer and host of our virtual presentations. Today, we're thrilled to introduce a brand new tour launching in January of 2025, South Texas in Style. The detailed itinerary is available for download in the handout section in the toolbar. The Lower Rio Grande Valley has long been known as one of America's greatest birding and wildlife areas. This exciting departure offers an immersive experience to the bird-rich Lower Rio Grande Valley. But this tour is more than just birding. It combines culture, history, fine dining, and luxury accommodations for a well-rounded exploration of this vibrant region. Guiding us through the highlights of this tour is none other than the Vent Tour leader, Brad McKinney. Welcome, Brad.
Hey, welcome, Ben. Thank y'all for coming.
For those of you who haven't yet met Brad, I'd like to share a little bit about him. Brad's birding journey began in 1987 during a remarkable winter of Mexican rarities recorded in South Texas. With a passion for birds and nature photography, his expertise spans North America, Mexico, Central America, and beyond. Brad is also a veteran guide at the Rio Grande Birding Festival and has led Texas pelagic trips from his home in South Padre Island since 1995. A co-author of A Birder's Guide to the Rio Grande Valley, Brad's deep connection to this region, paired with his knowledge for its birds and hidden cultural gems, makes him a perfect leader for this new tour. Now, let's turn to Brad as he shares why the South Texas in Style is the ultimate way to experience the valley's birding and cultural offerings in January.
Wow, thanks, Ben. I really appreciate that intro. And welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you could tune in to one of Ben's fine webinars. And I can't tell you how excited I am that you're here with us to experience a little bit about what makes this place so special to me. I mean, I've lived here most of my adult life and have been birding most of that time. And, I've had some wonderful experiences from the coast upriver to the Falcon Dam area that we'll be venturing to in the extension of this tour. But the main tour is going to be wonderful as well. And it's just exciting to be able to share all these locations that I've had such fond memories of over the years with you all. And, the best memories I have of these wonderful adventures have been when we've shared them with like-minded people like yourself. So I'm super excited about inviting you to join this wonderful tour that Barry Lyon really has talked to me about over the last year and a half. And so it's really a wonderful combination of culture, history, birding, just lots of fun things that we'll be doing and enjoying along this stay. And I also want to thank Ben really for providing the maps. I've got some courtesy photos also from Texas Parks and Wildlife, Quinta Mazatlan, the National Butterfly Center, and others. And most of the photos, though, are mine, for better or for worse. And I'm also happy to have Rick Wright, a veteran vent leader and also in-style tour leader extraordinaire, joining me on this journey coming up in January. So super happy about inviting you all into this tour. And we'll get started here on some details about what we're going to experience together. All right. Yes, the South Texas in Style, a birding and nature and culture tour, is really something that's going to be a wonderful experience for all of us. And just wanted you to know that the dates for this tour, I believe there's still 2 spots available. It's January 6th through the 16th. And the Upriver extension is going to be the following 3 days from the 16th through the 19th. And I believe there's still a few slots left on that one. So that's basically this year's schedule, which really allows for full 9 days of birding in really 2 premier locations, one based out of McAllen, which will provide access to a lot of the mid-valley birding hotspots like Benson State Park and Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge and Quinta Mazatlan and others. And then we're going to also experience some of the coastal delights over in the Port Isabel realm, which is right on the coast across from Padre Island. South Padre Island, I should say. And there's going to be a full 4 days there. And so really excited about the diversity of the experiences between those mid-valley and coastal hotspots. And then that upriver extension really does bring into view some really unique scenic areas and birds that you just can't find elsewhere, really anywhere in the U.S. So we're looking forward to talking a little bit about that towards the end. And in a nutshell, what's really great about this tour is, as Ben mentioned earlier, is the incorporation of some historical and cultural aspects to our birding adventures. You know, we're going to be visiting a couple of really nice museums, which will really bring in that bicultural aspect of the area. It's got great dining. We'll be, having some wonderful restaurant visits and just really nice things in that realm. The dining is going to be great. We're also going to be heading to some coastal hotspots via a riverboat, or actually a Laguna Madre boat trip. So there'll be a couple of boat trips involved, as well as a battlefield visit. So there's a whole lot of neat things to experience on this tour, real diverse, but also focus on the birding and the natural history and enjoying those adventures together. The scene that you see on this slide really is one of the spots we'll be visiting on the coast. It's taken from the Convention Center Boardwalk at South Padre Island. And this is kind of a typical afternoon setting, beautiful sunsets. And I can't guarantee that great blue heron with his wings outspread will be there, but we should have some real nice views throughout our days along the coast as well. And one of the many special birds we're going to be seeing is some of what we call the valley specialties, or the Rio Grande Valley specialties. And birds like the Altamira oriole are just amazingly beautiful. And so that's what we're going to be really honing in on when we go to our various sites in the mid-valley as well as the lower valley. This bird can be found throughout our first 9 days. It might turn up anywhere. It's also found in the Upper River extension as well. And it just glows orange. It's just one of these large tropical orioles that just extends barely into Texas here in the Rio Grande Valley. The sexes are alike, actually, like most tropical orioles, unlike the temperate orioles that have male-female differences. This Altamira oriole, I can't tell if it's a male or female actually from this photo, but it's quite a beauty. And we're looking forward to seeing not only this bird, but seeing it well, along with a lot of the other specialties. As we fly into McAllen, this will be our home base for the next 5 days. The first 5 days, it's the luxurious Casa de Palmas in McAllen. It's right in the middle of what they call the art district of McAllen, which is literally 10 minutes from the airport. And it's going to be just a really nice home base for that first 5 days that we're staying in the McAllen area. And there's actually a free shuttle to the Casa de Palmas from the airport. The rooms are real nice, real comfortable rooms. The grounds are beautiful. A lot of Spanish architecture abounds, nice grounds. So it's really going to be a nice home base. And the nice thing about Casa de Palmas is it's really within 20 to 30 minutes of all our morning hotspots that we'll be venturing to. And we'll be going over those here in just a few minutes. But places like Quinta Mazatlan's only like 8 minutes away. Benson State Park is maybe 22 minutes away, places like that. So that's going to be our home base for the first 5 days. And then we're going to move over to Port Isabel at the charming Lighthouse Boutique Hotel in Port Isabel. It's right across the street from the famous historic landmark, which is the Port Isabel Lighthouse. And it's going to be, that lighthouse was built in 1952 or 1852. So it's quite an old lighthouse, and it's the only one that actually allows active visitation. So we will have a chance to climb up the lighthouse while we're there. But the Lighthouse Boutique, we're going to literally rent out the hotel. We'll have all of the rooms booked. So really, we'll be the only ones there throughout our time along the coast at Port Isabel. There will be maybe some folks venturing into the gift shop and the cafe, but for the most part, the Lighthouse Boutique will be South Texas in style participants. The dining is going to be wonderful. The first 5 days in the McAllen area is going to be lots of great authentic cuisine. As we get to the coast, a lot of seafood options, Also, there's going to be vegan and vegetarian options throughout. A lot of really nice organically sourced food. So we're going to be dining at the finest places that we can. That's what InStyle is all about, enjoying the time that we have together over lunch, over dinner. That's a picture of some drinks. I think my wife and I were with a family group not long ago. And I said, honey, get those together. That's going to be an InStyle photo. So you can see some of the options that we have dining wise. Going to be nice. The first of 2 visits to some wonderful museums. The first is in Edinburgh. We're going to be visiting this fine museum of South Texas history on the second afternoon that we're there. That'll be in the late afternoon. We'll be heading out to the museum where we'll have a really fine interpreter. Hopefully Dr. Wahardo will be there to guide us. I think Barry has had him with the 45th anniversary group, and he was very impressed, and we're trying to get him right now. I just talked to him recently, and so that's the idea, is we'll hopefully have Dr. Wahardo interpret through the fine exhibits they have. Really does focus on a lot of cultural uniqueness to our area with the influences of northern Mexico and a lot of the history of the area. So we're really looking forward to kind of getting immersed in what's unique about this area beyond the natural history and beyond birding. We're going to really take in the cultural aspects of the region. And day 6, I believe, is in that transition day between the Mid-Valley in McAllen and Port Isabel along the coast. And about a block away from our hotel, the Lighthouse Boutique Hotel, is this really nice Port Isabel Historical Museum. It's a historical landmark. It was built in the late 1890s. Charles Champion was the owner, and that building has actually been through. It was once, I think, a general store. It was a post office. It was a restaurant. Now, since I think the mid 1990s, it has been the house of the Port Isabel Historical Museum. And just on a personal note, this place has a special place in my heart, because this is where I proposed to my wife in 1987, and she's featured in that little picture on the right. We just took that picture a couple of weeks ago. And that's back when it was a restaurant called Cappuccino's. So that was on the second floor, is about second level, right in the middle. That's right where our table was. And I think fondly every time I see that Port Isabel Museum. Anyway, we're going to be visiting that museum later in the trip, and it's going to have a lot of nice exhibits with the Mexican-American War. It'll talk about some of the things that we're going to actually visit on site at the Palo Alto battlefield. It also talks about the shrimping and fishing industry and some of the really unique historical aspects of the region, from railroads to irrigation, everything else. So anyway, that's going to be a fun stop in one of the afternoons early on in our coastal trip. We'll also be visiting the Palo Alto battlefield. This is a site of the first battle of the Mexican-American War back in 1846. I think it was May 8th was the date that this battle was fought, a very important battle in the actual geographic boundaries of the United States, really, with the addition of Texas. So this really did help finalize that state boundary in 1848, I believe. It's a 2-year war, but this is an important battle. So we'll be heading out to the battlefield. There's going to be an interpreter that will answer questions that we might have while we're birding. There's good sparrow spots and other birds of that coastal prairie region, which is where it's located in the Brownsville area. Laguna Madre boat trip. Oh my gosh, this is going to be fun. This is, I believe, our second morning when we're on the coast. We're going to be taking a couple of small boats that are actually really nice flat bottom boats that will take us from South Padre Island out of the Sea Ranch Marina across the Brazos Santiago Pass over to Bird Island, which is on the Port Isabel side of the bay. And so we're going to be looking for a lot of water birds while we're there. One of the targets is in that kind of a mangrove tussle over there on Bird Island. They have actually a small population of mangrove yellow warblers, which is a unique subspecies of yellow warbler that's only found barely in the U.S. in the very specific mangrove habitat. So it's going to be fun to kind of look for that bird on that tour. It's about a 2-hour boat ride, by the way. It's a kind of a slow moving flat water boat. There's no waves or anything like that. Now, in the unlikely event that there was a passage of a cold front, and you can see they are wearing in this photo, this was taken back 2 years ago in January. So you can see that it could be cool. For most part, it's going to be in the 60s and probably low 70s, but in the morning it could be brisk if there was a passage of a cold front, a day or two earlier or whenever. So you could see some cool weather, but for the most part, it's going to be probably mild throughout. But we always have to be prepared. But in the event that there would be a passage of a front about the time of our boat trip, the captain has allowed me to move the trip one day or another to make sure that we have the most ideal conditions for that trip. But it should be really fun. Some of the birds we could see, oh my gosh, in addition to a lot of the more expected gulls like laughing gull, herring gull, ring-billed gull, things like that, there are possibilities for Bonaparte's gull and others. Even lesser blackback could show up along the banks along the pass there, along with possibly common loons. But there's a whole lot of diversity along this stretch. So looking forward to the boat trip, in addition to seeing possibly dolphins. I would say that's pretty expected to see during this trip, is to see bottlenose dolphins jumping. Always fun to see them. And there's a pretty sizable herd in that area. So we're going to be seeking out dolphins if we see them, which I imagine we have a good chance for. A little less likely would be green sea turtles, which are in the area, but we will keep a lookout for them because there's this area is such rich in life. And we'll talk a little bit about the nature of this area of the Laguna Madre and why it's so productive shortly. But just know that we are going to have a lot of varied activities to make this trip a real special one. The second boat trip is going to be a 1-hour Laguna Madre sunset cruise, which is going to take place from the dock of the restaurant that we're going to be dining at that evening. And it's going to be nice. So we're really looking forward to the sunset cruise. You bring your binoculars because there are fun things to see along the water on posts, pilings. There's osprey and gosh, it could be peregrine falcons cruising by, along with some of the waders. Shorebirds are possible, gulls. So we'll keep our eyes out as well as enjoying the sunset before our evening dinner. And this is just kind of a visual through some of the Rio Grande habitats as we move from upriver down towards the mouth at the Gulf of Mexico, which we call Boca Chica. So if you look out to the right side of this photo, if you go out of the photo, that's probably near Falcon Dam. So the releases of water coming from Falcon Dam actually cause the river is running from right to left. So when we say upriver, we're pointing upriver towards the Falcon Dam area of Starr County. Some of the famous areas up here are talking about Santa Margarita Ranch, Salineno, and some Falcon State Park is up in this area. So we have some real nice places to visit on the upriver extension. Here is a photo from the bluffs at Santa Margarita, which lately has been notorious for some of the recent rare findings up here. So there's some things we'll talk about later on in the presentation that we'll talk about some of those birds that we'll be looking for, as well as regional specialties. But the habitat type, you can see it's kind of a xeric type of a desert chaparral until you're right along the banks of the river. And there it has nice riparian shade trees. And as we work our way eastward, we pass through Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge. And you can see the river on the left is passing from the top to the left is the direction again of the flow of the river towards the coast. And this picture was taken in February. I can tell that from the Resaca blooming, those red or the kind of an orangey puffball blooms on the banks of the river. There's a lot of native plants to discover while we're there and to enjoy. A lot of the interactions with insect life and all other forms of life are abundant along this corridor of the Rio Grande. Also on the right side is a typical scene from the Tamaulipan thorn scrub that's predominant in northeast Mexico into South Texas and up almost towards San Antonio. So we have a lot of thorn scrub that we'll be passing through, and some shade trees like cedar elm and sugar hackberry have some of the Spanish moss you see, but there's also a host of thorny and spiny trees that we'll be pointing out along the way. And benefiting these string of pearl refuges from that Falcon Dam area towards the coast is the green jay, enjoying this thick thorn scrub habitats where it thrives. And although the green jay can be found almost up to the Balcones escarpment up just around San Antonio area, the stronghold of the green jay and many of these South Texas specialties, these specialties that we'll be talking about, are here in the Lower Rio Grande Valley. And so we are going to be seeking out all of those birds as we enjoy each of these days together. The Rio Grande continues its passage through Santa Ana onwards towards the coast. And when we do, we pass through kind of a narrow strip of habitat called coastal prairie. And it's kind of dominated by some of the succulents that you see, like the prickly pear on the left and the Spanish dagger, which is in the yucca family on the right, mesquite, some of the shrubs, lantana, and we'll see some grasses, cordgrass and others, a lot of different flowering shrubs. And so we'll be seeking out some specialty birds in this area, as well as enjoying that habitat type. White-tailed hawks and oplomado falcons are a couple of the things we'll be looking for as we move our way towards the coast. As we continue on, the mouth of the Rio Grande is about 5 miles south of this picture on the left. That picture on the left actually is the South Padre Island jetties. And there's the Brazos Santiago Pass is that body of water between the two jetties. The further jetty on the right is the Boca Chica jetty, and that is the boundary of the Brazos Santiago Pass. And if you continue to the right off the screen, about 5 miles is the mouth of the Rio Grande. So we are entering the beautiful Gulf of Mexico region. That's the open coast on the left. Some of the sand dunes with its vegetation on the right mark a lot of the area along the open coast. You see a lot of vegetation like crotons and sea oxide daisy and railroad vine and sea oats and others that mark this beautiful area of dunes along the immediate coast. But just inland from the immediate coast is the clear waters of the Laguna Madre. And I'll tell you what, this is a very interesting area. It's highly productive because it's one of only the six hypersaline lagoons, in the world. And this is a real extensive, shallow body of water that runs really from where we are in this picture, which is right at the South Padre Island Convention Center area, all the way north towards Corpus Christi. It's about 3 foot deep in average. And the hypersalinity actually allows a lot of shoal grass and other seagrasses to thrive in this area, which really provides a nursery for shrimp and fish, as well as food for a lot of the waterfowl out in the Lower Laguna Madre. We're going to be really enjoying scoping from the various vantage points, like the convention center, like the birding center just north of or south of this spot at the South Padre Island Birding and Nature Center. So it'll be a lot of fun viewing from this area in the mangrove shoreline. And in particular, I just wanted to point out just how important that Laguna Madre ecosystem is for waterfowl and other water birds. And in particular, the Laguna Madre of Texas, and there's also a Laguna Madre of Mexico as well, which is also an extensive flatwater hypersaline lagoon. It's hypersaline really because there's not a lot of freshwater inflow into this saltwater bay. There's high evaporation because of the location geographically. We're pretty far south, so the summers are very hot, not that much rain. So the saltwater is virtually about twice that at times than the nearby Gulf of Mexico. Very little inflow except through the jetties at Port Mansfield, which is about 60 miles north of here, as well as the jetty. So this area with that hypersalinity does provide a lot of food, shoal grass, turtle grass, and others for birds like the redheads, which most of the world's population overwinters in Texas and Mexico right in this Laguna Madre area. So we're talking about 700,000 to maybe 2.3 million birds. And although we'll see just a fraction of that, we should get wonderful looks through the scope at not only redheads, but other waterfowl as well. And this is one of Ben's maps that I really like it. It's just it shows really just how small this area is. It's about the size of Connecticut, maybe right here at the southern tip of Texas. And in that area, we have about 531 species or so of birds in that small geographic area. And it really is, this biodiversity really is comes from its geographic position. When you see the Rio Grande bordering the lower valley on the south end, and then you've got the Gulf of Mexico on the eastern end, and it's got really a crossroads of both desert, coastal, tropical, and temperate ecosystems and habitat types that really do allow a diversity of birds. We're not far from Mexico, so you get a lot of Mexico species creep on into the lower valley. Some even rarities from the mountains of Monterey and some of the cloud forests of southern or of actually northeastern Mexico. So you do get lots of variety of birds in this small area. So I really like what that map represents, and you can see that crossroads effect. And as we continue to drill down towards the lower valley, again, one of Ben's maps that really shows some of the locations and venues that we will see during our time. So in general, we've got 3 major clusters of sites, the first of which is in the center of this photo, this map that shows our mid-valley spots near McAllen. And each of those spots is special in its own way. I mean, it's just going to be wonderful to be visiting places like Quinta Mazatlan and Benson State Park and Santa Ana and Estero Llano Grande and others that are literally within 30 minutes of the hotel. And if you look towards the right blue grouping, which is roughly an hour, 20 minutes away, you see Port Isabel, which I believe is number 10, and some of the South Padre Island hotspots near there, which is very close, maybe within 10 to 12 minutes of our hotel there. And then we'll do a travel day back on, I think, day 10 back towards McAllen. And then we will have that upriver extension, which on the left are those 4 red dots out near Falcon Dam. And we'll talk about those in a little bit, but that's generally the way this trip will be organized, sort of from the center towards the coast and then back upriver towards the tail end of the tour. And as you drill down even further, this is actually the map for where we're going to be starting. With the airport, our hotel, and Quinta Mazatlan, our very first morning stop, being really within 10 minutes of each other. And then some of the other spots that we've mentioned, and we'll go through some of those briefly here in just a couple minutes. But we're going to start with Quinta Mazatlan. And this is just a wonderful old Spanish hacienda style. This is one of the city sites of the World Birding Center complex, which is essentially, I think, 9 sites from the Roma area of Starr County and western upriver part of the valley, all the way towards the coast at South Padre Island. So the World Birding Center sites really are a combination of some of the city sites with some of the state park sites. And so we'll be visiting virtually all of them within our time. And this very first morning will be a really nice start to our tour. We'll have a chance to walk the trails, and these trails are not too long. It's about a 20-acre refuge altogether. And really the centerpiece is this Spanish style hacienda that we'll be able to view after our lunch. So actually before lunch, we'll be actually viewing the hacienda, and then we'll be heading off to McAllen area, not far away, for our first dining experience. Then we'll have a little downtime before dinner. And in that first day, we're going to make our first search. Hopefully we won't need another search for the green parakeet, red-crowned parrots of McAllen, those residential areas. We tend to have some pretty good spots for them. But if we strike out for some reason, we'll try others. So we've got multiple spots for parrots, but that will be what we'll do in the late afternoon on that first day that we're there. The second morning is going to be spent at Benson State Park, which is actually the headquarters of the World Birding Center. And this is a place that I worked at for a couple of years. My only break from education was the time I was a birding programs director here at the World Birding Center, housed out of Mission at the time. And boy, I tell you what, it's something. It's a special place. And it will be wonderful to spend our first full day at a state park at Benson State Park, where we'll be able to see a lot of beautiful specialties up close at some of the feeding stations not far from the headquarters right here. We'll also be able to head into some of the other sites that border the Oxbow Lake, as well as a hawk tower visit as well on our second morning here in the tour. And just as kind of a representative habitat type, on the right, you see some of the thorn scrub that mark some of this region that we'll be visiting here at Benson. And then the next morning, and by the way, after that first morning at Benson, we will be heading to the Museum of South Texas History. So we're looking forward to that. Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge is a 2,000-acre gem. I mean, it is really incredible. This photo is taken actually from the Hawk Tower, which we'll be visiting on that third morning. We'll be heading out to Santa Ana from McAllen. Takes about, somewhere around 25 minutes. And this will probably be the place that we'll be doing the longest hikes, the longest walks. It'll all be flat, but there is a couple of places that might require a little bit more walking than others. There's a area around what we call Willow Lakes. It's a small trail that you can see a lot of nice birds, a lot of waterfowl, a lot of nice things. Then there's a little further trail out towards Pintail Lakes, off in the distance under the rainbow out there. And we'll be looking for a lot of different kinds of ducks and different kind of water birds as well. So that will be one full morning there. And we're really looking forward to Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge. It's a beautiful, beautiful refuge. That afternoon after Santa Ana, we'll be heading to Edinburgh Scenic Wetlands, which is not far from the hotel, probably about 15 minutes away. And this is a really nice, one of the city sites of the World Birding Center complex. And they probably one of the better places in the wintertime to see buff-bellied hummingbird. So that's one of the, of course, they have kingfishers, water birds. It's really a nice place to see. We'll be spending, a couple hours there in the afternoon on that third day. The fourth morning will be at Anzalduas County Park and the National Butterfly Center. Really, really nice place to visit. About 15 minutes away, 20 minutes away from our hotel. We'll be probably starting at the Anzalduas County Park and waiting till the mid-morning to head over to the National Butterfly Center. Might be a little bit better for butterflies as the morning gets a little on. There's also feeders there. So not only are the butterflies great at the Butterfly Center, but there's also really good birds, sometimes Audubon's, orioles, and a lot of the specialties there. Anzalduas also has one of the places that we could search for Sprague's pipits. We're looking forward to seeking out some of the things that might be one of the few places that we will have opportunity to see birds like that. But it's a lot of diverse mixed species flocks in some of the trees in and around Anzalduas as well. Then on our travel day, on day 5, we'll be heading out to Estero Llano Grande State Park. This is also part of the World Birding Center complex. So this will be the second of our state park sites. A lot of diversity there. They have a tropical zone, which is up on the upper right, which has a lot of resident specialties like green jay and others, and even some rarities have at times shown up in some of these oaks and some of the tall shade trees in the tropical zone. And then we have sort of the centerpiece right next in the main picture there on the left is the wetland there, not far from the visitor center. And I might say all these visitor centers are nice. They're a place we can all spend a little time, looking at gifts and things and enjoying some of the books and T-shirts and caps and other things that they use, that they sell in the gift shops. One of the really best places to see a common paraki is actually at Estero Llano Grande State Park. So we are going to actually be making a little bit of a hike out to an area that has been very consistent for those birds. And that's just off of a trail there. So we're going to be looking for that specialty. That might be one of the best places that we'll have to search for the nocturnal crepuscular common paraki. But there's just a host of birds we could see at this transition day, which is our travel day. We'll be spending the morning on the 5th day there, have lunch in Weslaco. This is in Weslaco, Texas, by the way. And then we'll be heading from there towards Port Isabel after lunch. I think this would be a good time to talk a little bit about the Rio Grande specialties, some of these special birds of the valley. It's really a delta, not a valley. There are no mountains and hills nearby, but more of a Rio Grande delta. But the term valley kind of was coined in the agriculture boom of the early 1900s, so that name sort of stuck. So we're the Lower Rio Grande Valley, and some of these specialties include birds like the Altamira oriole on the left that you saw on the second slide of this presentation. What a beauty. Can't get enough of that bird, and we should see that bird in, like I said, several locations. Clay-colored thrush is another bird that is a specialty bird, not the most beautiful, but it's a great singer. And it's a bird that has pretty recently actually become established in the valley, although very local. in areas, it is become much more likely to find. And I expect we'll see multiple birds throughout our trip down in South Texas, not to mention the green jay, which is a stunner on the right there. And we should see that in just about every forested location that we venture to. Long-billed thrashers can be tough in the winter, although you often hear them shuffling around in the leaf litter, and there are some places that they actually do come out on the edge, especially in feeding areas. So we will be searching for long-billed thrashers and Kiskadees. Anywhere there's water edge, we likely will have a Kiskadee to look at some point. Quite a stunningly beautiful zebra striped head, rufous wings, and lemon yellow underparts. So looking forward to not just seeing the specialties, but seeing them well. And some other birds that are sort of special to the valley would be tropical kingbird, which, like the clay-colored thrush, has been sort of a recent, the last couple decades, they've really become well established in the valley. And at one point, both of those were Texas rarities. So it's just been in the last maybe 15, 20 years that they've become really fairly easy to find in the valley. So we'll be looking for tropical kingbirds. Olive sparrows are always denizens of the thick understory. We'll hopefully get one of those little beauties out from time to time, especially in the feeding areas. Sometimes they do get bold and come out for a brief look, but they can often be hidden in the thick understory. We mentioned buff-bellied hummingbird earlier. This bird, for the most part, retreats into Mexico during the wintertime, but there are usually a few hanging around somewhere, and Edinburgh is one of those spots that we'll be certainly looking for them. Chachalacas on the right, plain Chachalaca, white-tipped dove, birds that also come out in decent numbers, especially where they're being fed and are protected. So those are normally shy birds anywhere else, but in some of the feeding stations that we'll be visiting, we'll hopefully get really good looks at both of these birds. And this is a view from the Hawk Tower at Santa Ana. It is a beautiful vista, about 40 feet high, about the same height as that Port Isabel lighthouse we saw earlier. Whereas the Benson State Park Hawk Tower is a little bit lower, but it takes a few extra twists and turns to get near the top of the Hawk Tower there at Benson. We will visit both of these locations, and we'll hopefully have some nice raptor viewing throughout our stay. And the raptors that we see may not be from the towers per se, but there's a good chance we will see some things from the towers. Some of the birds or some of the raptors we could see, and this is not a full list. This is just a representative of some of those raptors that are found throughout South Texas in the winter and sometimes all year round. We have birds like northern harriers. That's an adult male there. But we do see a lot of juveniles and browner looking females, but you'll see that white rump, that swept back wing, and that bird could be anywhere from the coast all the way into the mid valley. We'll be looking for it whenever we pull over to look for anything. We'll keep an eye out for birds like that. Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, the accipiters. We'll be definitely pointing out ID features about how to distinguish between those two accipiters. You can see in this picture, this bird has a nice long rounded tail and a projecting head. So that's one of the things we'll be looking for, but this is no ID webinar. This is just to point out some of the things that we'll be seeing, like American kestrels should be seen throughout our trip. And often you can see those and distinguish them from Merlin by those banana peel flapping wings that Eric Brunke talks about in his Raptor presentation. So we'll be studying flight style. We'll be enjoying things in the air as well as perched, and point out any of these ID challenges every time they present themselves. White-tailed kites on the left are birds that we will see, especially early and late in the day, usually soaring, sometimes perched. And there's the Merlin. That's not the only falcon. Hopefully we'll be able to find not only aplomados, but peregrine falcons throughout our time. And of course, crested caracaras anywhere along the roadside, we have a chance at seeing them. And some of the larger buteos, we have gray hawk. That's sort of a specialty hawk of the area. We'll be definitely looking for those, especially when we're in places like Benson State Park, Santa Ana, and even upriver in the areas of Salineno and Santa Margarita Ranch. Probably better chances of seeing gray hawks in the mid and upper valley. Sometimes they'll show up in the lower valley as well, so we can look for them basically anywhere. But that is a beautiful, mostly tropical raptor that extends its range into parts of the U.S., including the valley. Zone-tailed hawks, a little bit harder to find. They are very local. Usually in the winter, they're somewhere, so we'll be certainly looking for them, whether it's on the tower or in some of our urban locations, we'll be keeping our eye to the sky, and it's very vulture-like in its flight style. But usually one can be pulled out of the sky with its banded tail. That's what we'll be looking for when we look at vultures in flight. We'll see if we can't pull out a zone tail somewhere, but that's a tough one to find. So definitely not expected, but we'll certainly give it a shot. Birds like red-shouldered hawks are fairly common throughout the valley in winter. Harris's hawks are there all year round, and they often are found in little groups of communal breeders. They're fun bird to see when you might see 3 or 4 together. Beautiful chocolate brown bird with bay wings. The undisputed rarity or local specialty, if you will, I call it rarity because it's not often seen, but occasionally these birds will show up in different places, especially where there's abundance of tree snails. And this hookbill kite, this is a male hookbill. You can see that slaty gray plumage, nice bands on the sides. He's got nice barred sides and really kind of a ping pong paddle shaped outer wing, long tail. It's a very unique silhouette. This photo is taken from the hawk tower and it's swept by at eye level. So it really doesn't show the typical silhouette you see from below, which is a really distinctive, broad winged, pinched in at the base and long tail, and these checkered wings are really distinctive. If you happen to get a perch bird, one that you can see that white eye of an adult and that strongly hooked bill, which is perfect for extracting the snails out of the shells, as well as that unique laurel pattern of yellow and green in front of the eye. It's a really beautiful raptor. We're looking forward to getting in position to see one of those somewhere, but it will be a really aha moment if we do, because they're definitely not expected, but we'll give it a shot. Some of the features of the valley, just to kind of point out, the Rio Grande, as it heads towards the coast, really does meander and sometimes cuts off channels called oxbow lakes. And there's most of the oxbow lakes are in maybe the last 50 miles of the river as it enters the Gulf of Mexico. So in the lower valley, you see more resacas, we call them in Spanish, essentially an oxbow, a cut off U-shaped channel. And some of the ones that you find naturally, they're seasonal. They grow a lot of nice vegetation when monsoons in September and October come along, where we get more rainfall. They sometimes fill up a little bit. Sometimes they're actually managed and they actually have water pumped in. Places like Santa Ana and also Itinerary Grande can actually pump water into these Resaca beds, these water areas, which are great for shorebirds and to waterfowl, depending on the season and the depth. What you see on the bottom right is your typical Resaca or oxbow lake in urban areas where they're kept full year round. And whether they're seasonal or kept full year round, which are not usually as productive because the vegetation is kind of swamped out by the water, but you do see often a variety of waterfowl on these oxbow lakes and other water birds. Birds that we're going to be certainly looking for, in addition to the more common black-bellied whistling duck on the right, or occasionally you'll have a fulvous whistling duck mixed in with the black belly. So that's definitely a bird we'll be looking for. Whenever we see black bellies, we'll be looking for that beautiful kind of a caramel color of the fulvous. Also in these oxbow lakes, sometimes you get least grebes, which are very fun to watch. They are entertaining, but they're often seen along the edges. So it takes a sharp eye to spot one, but they are around in most winters. They're actually a year-round bird, so we could see them anywhere, but we'll keep an eye everywhere from upriver at Falcon through the mid-valley impoundments and waterways all the way towards the coast. They're not on the immediate coast, but in a lot of the wetlands inland, we will be looking for least grebes, which have the little yellow eye. They're really tiny, cute little things, and they like dragonflies amongst other invertebrates. We have white-faced ibis on the right, flock of birds often that we'll see when we're out at different refuges in the mid-valley especially, but they could show up anywhere, wherever there's inland waterways. The vegetation, we're going to have a lot of it to look at, and a lot of it's very diverse, especially the thorn scrub. There's a lot of shrubs and spiny, thorny plants, but there's also some of the taller shade trees. We'll look for things like sable palms, Texas ebony. Fiddlewood has the nice berries that you'll often see even in the wintertime. They could have berries for fruit. Turk's cap, hummingbirds usually like that, amongst other butterflies as well, tenasa. So this is just some representative legumes and other trees that we'll have to look at while we're there, and notice some of the interactions that we see right there in the flowers and leaves, whether it's butterflies or birds. We're going to be looking for them. Here's kind of a dynamic of the valley in winter in parts of South Texas, is this concept or this idea of mixed species flocks, and having these birds kind of get together in the winter as foraging flocks. And often it's led by the tufted, or what we have, the black crested titmouse. And this bird kind of is the ringleader, the Pied Piper of these mixed species flocks. And often in these mixed species flocks, you'll see things like blue-gray gnatcatchers and blue-headed vireos and others. And often, once you get into a mixed species flock, little things turn up. The most likely wintering warblers that we see are the yellow rump warbler on the left. This is the myrtle race, which is that white-throated race from the east. But you can also sometimes get audubons, or the yellow-throated subspecies, mixed in as well. But this bird, it winters throughout a lot of the U.S. Because of the fact it uses that bile to digest the seed coat, so it can actually utilize seeds and berries or fruit, whereas other warblers are still primarily insect eaters. Like the orange crown on the right is another common warbler we'll see, virtually throughout our tour. It can eat oranges, and it does tend to eat, fruit juices, but it's another bird that we're going to be, seeing quite often. But when we think of mixed species flocks, and those are the most common warblers of the mixed species flocks, but what we really are having a fun time looking for are things like black-throated green, which is found usually in small numbers in mixed flocks throughout. They're tough to find. They're not in every mixed species flock, but they are occasionally ones that we'll be able to see. Wilson's warbler, which was my spark bird back in 1987, when I was able to identify that on my own with my Peterson's Birds of Texas guide. That's a bird that spends the winter in the valley, and it's more often found in lower shrubs, but it can be also mid canopy as well. Yellow-throated warblers, often in the palm trees, you'll hear a nice loud chip, and it sounds kind of like a yellow warbler, but it's actually yellow-throated warbler. Yellow warblers are also possible in very small numbers in the valley. So we do have some other birds that can sometimes join the mixed species flock, but those are the most common up on the top. Pine warblers occasionally in more of the mid to western part of the valley, not as much on the eastern end, but we will maybe we might encounter a pine warbler or two while we're there. But really the stars of the mixed species flocks, if you will, would be the two on the bottom left and the bottom right, which would be the black-throated gray and the tropical parula. Those are two birds that we always think about when we get into a mixed species flock, and you hear all the titmice going and the chip notes, and then you're hoping maybe one of those turns up. So we'll be keeping an eye out for all the different things of a mixed species flock as we enjoy these treetop birding adventures. As we head into the lower valley, we're heading out towards Port Isabel, which is number 10 on the map. Thank you, Ben, for that map again. And you can see the cluster again in better detail here in this map of where we'll be going for that last 4 days. And we'll be heading to various spots along the island, as well as we'll head it to an inland spot, the famous Resaca de la Palma, as well as, and that's a little bit off the map on the bottom left, but the Palo Alto battlefield is one that we'll be also looking at as we head back towards McAllen on the last full day. After one of my vent tours, I can't remember which one it was. I was looking out the window of the plane coming into the Brownsville airport, and I saw this beautiful view of the island in Port Isabel. I think the pilot wanted to take a little scenic detour over that way, and I was able to snap a picture out the window with my cell phone. It turned out to be not too bad a photo, but you can kind of get an aerial view of what it looks like from maybe the perspective of, I guess, a peregrine falcon, maybe. But anyway, that's Port Isabel and the kind of the mid-right. That's the little town on the mainland side of the Laguna Madre. And there's South Padre Island that's connected by the Queen Isabella Causeway. And that muddier water that goes along the highest point of the causeway, by the way, that's the second longest bridge in Texas. It's, I think, 2.3 miles long. And it's got that muddier water because that's the intercoastal waterway that some of the larger vessels pass through underneath that bridge. And you can actually see on the far right, there's an old causeway back before 1974. That's the way we used to get on the island. And looks like they dismantled part of it, but left some of it as kind of an old fishing pier there. But not many people head over that way. But that is the old, if you wondered what that was, that's the old causeway from the early 70s and earlier. But anyway, that's what the aerial view of South Padre looks like. You can see that vast Laguna Madre and the open coast beyond. And there is the Queen Isabella Memorial Causeway as it connects Port Isabel on the left to South Padre on the right. And you can see that it's a shallow mangrove-laden body of water where on the shoreline, that black mangroves really do hold a lot of interesting species. And we'll certainly be looking throughout for gems hidden, sparrows, warblers, lots of birds, shorebirds in and around that area. Right across the street from our hotel is the Port Isabel Lighthouse. It's a state historical site. It has a staircase, I believe has maybe 70 some odd steps that goes up in a kind of a spiral staircase. Up near the top is a Fresnel lens, and it's really a beautiful lens up there. You can get out and see that view on the right is from the lighthouse looking towards South Padre. So that's another activity, one of the afternoons. Of course, it's an optional one, but it's one that will certainly avail to any of our participants that would like to go up and see the Laguna Madre and Port Isabel and South Padre from that beautiful vantage point. Our first full morning on the coast will be visiting the South Padre Island Birding and Nature Center. This is a World Birding Center city site, and you can see a vast network of boardwalks through the mangrove wetland. That's all black mangroves near the where it intersects with the Laguna Madre. And it's a wonderful place. During migration, it's wonderful. But even in the winter, there's just a host of water birds that we'll be able to find, through the scope on the boardwalk itself. As you head out towards the bay, there's just a lot of things to see. As you get closer to the end, there's boardwalks where we can see a lot of waterfowl. Pelicans are out there, brown pelicans. We even have mangrove yellow warbler. And this next photo shows exactly some of the birds that are waiting for us out there. Now, the mangrove yellow warbler, that can be tough, but they've been pretty lucky with that bird starting in about the time we'll be there. So we'll certainly look for and listen for the mangrove yellow. That's an adult with a full rufous head. That's actually a yellow warbler with that rufous head that really is distinctive. It's still just a subspecies, but it's really a beautiful local species that just reaches the U.S. here in South Texas. Birds like roseate spoonbill, always beautiful to see out in its habitat. Long-billed curlews, beautiful long 9-inch bills probing for worms in the Salicornia wetland there. Beautiful birds. We'll also see marbled godwits out there, a variety of shorebirds. Snowy plover, it's going to be tough, but it's one that more likely to see a semi-palmated plover than a snowy. Also, piping would be more likely, but there's sometimes opportunities to see things like snowy plovers amongst the other shorebirds. So we'll be scanning and watching for these. Really exciting place to be on the bay in the wintertime. South Padre Island Convention Center, another one of those spots that's really great in migration, but can also hold birds all year round. And a lot of people like a photo op at the whale wall there. And there is a lot of native vegetation in and around this complex called the Convention Center. In the boardwalk that extends from this area also has a lot of the birds that are seen just next door at the South Padre Island Birding and Nature Center, watching the colorful antics of reddish egrets dancing in the shallows, shading for fish to become visible. The oyster catchers, American oyster catcher with their loud peeps that you can usually find a pair of those somewhere, or one or two. Skimmers are skimming in the late afternoon, often clapper rails hiding in the cattails, but we will search for all these and others as we approach these boardwalk locations. This was my experiment as using a timed exposure, and this is the South Powder Island jetties. This is a place where you can see lots of things. We will be there one afternoon taking a look at the open beach. I know I want my participants to be able to get their toes wet into the Gulf of Mexico, at least partially, and the jetties is right there. There's some birds that really are found on this hard shore, because Texas coast doesn't have many hard shores. It's all soft shore sand, except for where jetties are used as for waterways of the barge traffic and others. But there are some birds out there that we can look for on the jetty itself. We won't be taking too long a trip down the jetty, but we will have an opportunity to scan for things. We often see brown pelicans feeding on bait fish not far from the jetty itself, as well as many locations along the coast. So that should be a bird we'll see in good numbers very well. And some of the birds of the rocky shores, of course, the willet, which is not shown, ruddy turnstone, and sanderling are most often seen on these rocky shores, but occasionally you'll see things. Now, this piping plover on the top right really isn't a bird of the hard shore so much as it was a bird that got flushed by a tourist and landed on a jetty when I was on the jetty looking for the purple sandpiper on the left, which is a rarity. So, but we will keep an eye out, because that is the season where interesting things can pop up, the winter season. So that's always something we'll keep attuned to eBird and through the rare bird alerts to see if things like that show up. And the good thing about our trip spread out over 9 days is that we will have an opportunity to have enough flexibility in the schedule to be able to pursue things that might come up during our time together. And our last full day along the coast is going to be spent at the world famous Resaca de la Palma State Park, the third of the World Birding Center State Park sites. It is really a gem. Not a lot of walking, as in most of the refuge that we'll be visiting. There's not a whole lot of walking. There's just some flat trails that emanate from the visitor center, which you see in the right near the flagpole there. And they have a feeding station, water features, really nice for seeing a lot of birds that come in up close. Some of the orioles, green jays, and white-tipped doves and others can be seen quite close. Good photo opportunities throughout, including Resaca de la Palma State Park. And I felt like, by virtue of the fact that these last couple of winters have had some really landmark rarities, just to point out some of the things not to be expected, but things that do show up from time to time by the valley's close proximity to Mexico. We do have things like, I guess the most likely rarity that we might find on our trip would be the rose-throated Picard in the center and the upper right dusky cap flycatcher. Those are birds that have shown up with more regularity in the last 10 years than the other birds that are on in this page, like golden crown warbler. Every couple of years, we might have one sighting. But in the last couple of years, we've had one each year, along with multiple crimson-collared grosbeaks, everywhere from Quinta Mazatlan all the way down towards Resaca de la Palma. Blue bunting is a real rarity. These are all tropical birds from Mexico that just certain years pop up in the valley, and they really make things colorful and exciting to see. And as you ratchet up the rarities, I had to throw this one out there because it's been a landmark year last year and the winter before of some of them were first state records, first U.S. records at Santa Ana. The bat falcon was the first time ever seen in the U.S. a couple of winters ago. Last year, the crane hawk showed up, which I had seen back in the late 80s. That was like my first really big rarity back in the 80s at Santa Ana. Showed up in Upriver at Salineno, the crane hawk on the left. It's a terrible picture of it, but that's the only thing I could grab in the quick view I got of it. Gray-collared Picard was a bird that showed up at Resaca de la Palma last winter and delighted a lot of folks. Fan-tailed warbler was in the Brownsville University of Texas Rio Grande Valley campus. Roadside hawk in the center was seen along the dry Resaca bed, the Oxbow Lake, not far from the visitor center at Resaca de la Palma. Really beautiful raptor, one that it's a juvenile bird, but one that we can certainly look for among others, like social flycatcher. That was another Brownsville area bird that showed up last year or the year before last as well. And so just to kind of whet the appetite that you just never know what to expect when you're in the valley. Things like that can't happen. And we'll certainly, Rick and I will be happy to try try to point out things if we can, and we have enough flexibility to where we can maybe make a run at one of these birds that might show up that are not exactly on our schedule. In that transition day back towards McAllen from Port Isabel, we will be first stopping in at the Palo Alto battlefield. We mentioned that earlier. And this is, again, coastal prairie habitat that has some unique species. Last couple of years have been really good for sparrows. Cassin sparrows up on the top right, brewer sparrow, which is very unusual for the valley. It's more of a western species, but we do find things like savanna sparrow, clay-colored sparrow, and others. So we have a chance to see a good variety of things on this interpretive tour, which will take about an hour, maybe an hour and a half at most in the morning on that last day as we head towards McAllen. We will also then go from there to the Valley Nature Center, which is another small refuge in the Weslaco area, before we go back towards McAllen for our final night for those on the main tour. But before we head out, I do want to point out that there are some raptors in that coastal prairie that we really do need to look for. And if we haven't seen white-tailed hawk or aplomado by then, we'll certainly take a look on that last day for them. Hopefully we'll have seen them before that point, because they do occur in areas that we pass through, on our birding forays. But the white-tailed hawk is just a stunner. What a beautiful long-winged raptor with that gleaming white breast, that rufous shoulder, and that stunning white tail with the black subterminal band. With any luck, we'll see multiple birds during our 9 full days. The aplomado falcon, a little bit rare and tougher to find, but one that does occur in the area. And this is a bird that really was not quite common ever, but always there was good numbers before the 1940s, but then it became extirpated. And fortunately, the Peregrine Fund had introduced a reintroduction program, and back in the, I think, early 1990s. And so all these birds that we see in South Texas are really the result of that captive breeding program, where there's been releases. And some of the birds you'll see still have bands on them. Others are young of those banded birds and do not have bands. But either way, it is a stunner of a falcon, and we'll be certainly seeking out every opportunity to find one during those trips through the coastal savanna. That brings us to the Upper Valley extension. This is really a nice addition to the main tour, where we have a chance to get out to the Upper Valley, which really has sort of rolling bluffs and a little different desert chaparral type habitat. So it brings into play other species like black-throated sparrow and others. But just to mention that the tour dates for these 2 tours, these consecutive year tours, are January 16th through 19th and January 22nd through 25th in the following year in 2026. So this is a really nice opportunity to see a variety of things that just will not be seen on the main tour, and you really have to get out to that part of the valley to see them. And just to point where it is that these birds lie in that pink square or rectangle that Ben has mapped out for us, it's really in that far western stretch. Up about 150 miles from the immediate coast is this area below Falcon Dam, and we'll be staying in the Zapata area, which is right under the word upper on Upper Valley Extension. That's the town of Zapata in Zapata County. So we'll be traveling about 25 minutes from Zapata into those hotspots each of the mornings, places like Salineno, Santa Margarita Ranch, Falcon State Park, and others. So we were going to be seeking out some real specialty birds that some of them can be seen from the Salineno feeding station, others along the river at Salineno, birds like Altamira Oriole, which we should have seen by then, but at the same time, it's really neat to see 5 birds in one field of view of the binoculars in a feeding station, along with a rare Audubon's Oriole on the right. And some of the desert birds like Pyrrholoxia would be birds that we'd expect to see, black-throated sparrow and others when we're in the more xeric, drier desert. And that's and also along the river at Salineno is the tiny morelet seed eater, which we will certainly look for in the very limited cattail Phragmites area right along the banks of the river. So we'll be looking for that tiny specialty as well when we're making these runs into these areas right along the river. We mentioned the Santa Margarita Bluffs. Well, Santa Margarita Bluffs have had a wonderful turn of events. The brown jay is a bird that really disappeared from the U.S. for nearly 20 years. It was locally common along a very limited stretch of Rio Grande from really below Falcon Dam towards Roma. But they basically disappeared a few years ago, and they became a Texas review species. And now, fortunately, in the last year and a half, we've got a little band of 5 brown jays that are now coming into oranges along the riparian zone of the Santa Margarita Bluffs. But before we get to the brown jay, I just wanted to point out that when we get to the bluffs in the morning, we are going to be looking for things like red-billed pigeon, be looking for ring kingfisher and others, Muscovy duck that sometimes flies along the stretch river, wild muscovies that are certainly birds that we'll be looking for. Now, the pigeon is more common in the late or the fall and late fall. As we get into winter, they're harder to find, but sometimes they do stick around and are found along the river, especially up in the tall shade trees. So we'll be scanning for those and others. But really, our parting slide here is our trek from the bluffs down to the riparian zone, which will be probably the longest hike of the entire trip, which might be an hour, maybe a mile and a half or so round trip down some sort of semi-steep rocky trails, but ones that we will take very slowly, because at the end of that little trail is hopefully one of the brown jays that really are wonderful species that are really tropical. It's about a crow-sized jay, really large and noisy. This bird, you can tell, is a juvenile by virtue of a little bit of yellow in the bill. The adults are fully black-billed, which is a good sign to see 3 of those 5, at least as of last year. I had not seen them in the last several months, but there was some amount of yellow on the 3 juvenile birds and 2 adults. So it's a nice little family unit of brown jays that have been coming in virtually every day for a while. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed. That will be certainly one of the birds we'll be looking for in this trip to the Upper Valley. I just want to thank everybody for being a part of this. And I just want you to know that Rick and I think about your safety and about your comfort and about your experience. Every hour that we're there, we're thinking about what will make this the finest trip that you'll have had all year long. And so that's my commitment and Rick's commitment to you all, as well as the Vent commitment of having these tours really be centered on participant enjoyment. And I'm just super happy to be able to be a part of this Vent team and to be able to initiate this tour with Rick on our very first maiden South Texas in style trip. And just a reminder that the tour dates are January 6th through 16th. And there's only 2 spaces available still for the main tour, and there might be a few more on the extension. But just want to thank you all for tuning in today. And I want to also just mention a little bit about the extension. These are the dates on the extension for both the January 2025 trip and the January 2026 trip. It's the 16th through the 19th of this year, and it's the 22nd through the 25th in 2026. And again, thank you all so much for tuning in. It's really been a pleasure taking you through one of my favorite areas, the Lower Rio Grande Valley. I love this place. We'll continue to love it till the day I leave this earth. And if you have any questions about anything on the reservations, Eric Lindquist would be happy to take your call or take your email and get you signed up. And I'm open for questions. Ben, Barry, thank you all. Appreciate your being a part of this wonderful experience here in developing a tour to my backyard, Lower Rio Grande Valley.
Yes, thank you so much, Brad. That was a wonderful presentation. And before we take questions, I do want to ask the audience if you have any questions or comments to put them in the chat or the Q&A section in the toolbar. So now we'll turn on our cameras. And I would like to announce that we have a special guest in-house with us. Joining us is Barry Line, CEO of Vent and veteran tour guide. Would like to make some remarks. Barry?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Brad, for this excellent, in-depth, and informative presentation. And the reason why I wanted to chime in here, everyone, and I thank you for staying tuned here, is that I wanted to provide a little bit of the backstory on this tour, which is that Vent, of course, has operated tours to the Rio Grande Valley the Lower Rio Grande Valley for many years, decades really. And going back at least 10 years, maybe 15 years, Victor Emmanuel and I would be in the valley, and while seeing all these special birds and going to these remarkable places, it wasn't lost on us how much more the valley has to offer. Brad covered very carefully the museums and battlefields and boat trips and all these things, the culinary delights, and the development of good hotels and restaurants in the valley. And Victor and I would sit around and talk about this and say, there is so much more to the valley than most people know about. And it is true that because the valley is such a special place for birds and birding, it is, in the eyes of many, it's one of the top 5 regions in the country for birding. And so as a result, all the tour companies do offer tours there, and rightfully so. But with this particular tour, we thought, what if we put together a trip that exposed people to all the birds and the places and so on, but then they got a lot more than that. And it took about 10 years for this trip to happen, because there were always some issues. There were always some reasons why we couldn't make it happen when we wanted to. But when Brad McKinney joined our company a couple of years ago, we knew that he was the right guy. He was the right person to turn this idea, this vision, into a reality. And I just know it's going to be a fantastic trip. It's a beautiful area. It's a wondrous area. There's just so much to see on these U.S. Mexico borderlands. And again, Brad is just the right person to lead you through this. And so I do, in closing, I just want to thank you, Brad, for this outstanding presentation, and I thank everybody for joining, and hope to see you, on a tour soon. If not Texas, perhaps somewhere else.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Appreciate those words.
Well, and Brad, it looks like, unfortunately, there aren't any questions because I think your presentation was so thorough. You answered everybody's questions. So
Okay.
I hope that everybody that is interested in this tour gets a chance to reach out to Eric for reservations for 2025 and for 2026. So thank you very much, Brad, and thank you everybody in the audience for joining us today. That concludes today's presentation. We look forward to seeing you in the field soon.
Thank you all.